The first time I saw my father in that house, he flinched like I was there to yell at him, not hug him. And when he finally looked up, his eyes didn't say son. They said, "Please don't make it worse. From which city and country are you watching?" Tell me in the comments, because this story happened in the United States, and I need to know where you're listening from while I tell you how close I came to losing my father to the one person I trusted most. Welcome back to the channel. If you believe in justice, if you've ever been underestimated, used, or betrayed by your own family, hit like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell, because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when someone tries to erase you, and you come home alive. I didn't come back to prove a point. I didn't come back to start a war. I came back because I was tired, and because the last voicemail my father left me had a tremble in it that didn't belong there. "Hey kiddo," he'd said, using the nickname he'd called me since I was 10. "Don't worry about me. I'm all right. Your sister's been helping. She said you've got a lot going on. Just call when you can." Then the message ended, not with his usual love you, but with a soft click, like someone had taken the phone from him. That's what brought me to 19 Ridgeview Crest outside of Bozeman, Montana, on a gray afternoon where the sky looked like cold steel. That's what made me drive past the pine trees and the expensive homes tucked into the foothills like secrets. The house was mine. On paper, anyway. I bought it 11 years ago after a tech exit that I still couldn't believe happened to me. A kid who grew up watching his dad patch a roof with whatever he could afford. I bought it with one goal: to make sure my father's last chapter didn't look like a struggle. His name is Gordon Hayes. He's 76. He's stubborn as a mule, the kind of man who says I'm fine even when his arm is bleeding. He raised me after my mom passed when I was 13. He worked construction, then ran a small handyman business. He taught me how to drive, how to apologize, and how to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. And in return, I promised him comfort. A quiet house with a view of the mountains. A porch where he could drink coffee. A workshop in the back where he could build birdhouses for neighbors and pretend he wasn't soft. I hadn't visited in 2 years. Work kept me on flights, in meetings, and in hotel rooms, always chasing the next deal. And my sister Vanessa kept telling me everything was under control. She's not a she, my brain corrected automatically. Not my mom, my dad. Vanessa had moved back to Montana after a divorce and claimed she wanted to help Dad. She said she'd handle appointments, groceries, and bills. She sounded responsible. She sounded mature. I believed her. The driveway was lined with cars when I arrived. Not normal Montana trucks either. These were sleek SUVs, fancy sedans, and plates from out of state. I slowed, confused, then rolled past the open gate. There was music, not loud, but curated. That kind of playlist that says, "This is a vibe." I parked near the garage and stepped out into cold air that smelt like cedar and money. And then I heard laughter. It was coming from the back, where the patio overlooked a slope of pines and distant snow-dusted peaks. I followed the sound, my suitcase still in my hand. I rounded the corner, and my stomach dropped. There were people everywhere. 20, maybe 30, drinks in hand, designer coats draped over chairs, a fire pit burning like it was auditioning for a lifestyle magazine shoot, and moving between them, quietly, carefully, like he didn't want to be noticed, was my father. He wore a faded flannel shirt, but it wasn't his flannel. It was too big, sleeves rolled up. He carried a tray of appetizers, his hands shaking just slightly from age or cold. A woman in a white sweater snapped her fingers at him. "Hey, can you bring more of those little salmon things?" My father nodded quickly and turned away. He didn't look like the man who used to lift drywall like it was nothing. He looked smaller, not just physically, like his spirit had been pressed down. I stood there, frozen, trying to figure out what I was seeing. This was the home I bought for him. So why did he look like the help? Then I saw Vanessa. She was by the fire pit, wrapped in a camel-colored coat, laughing with a tall man in a watch that cost more than my first car. She had a glass of wine in her hand like she'd been born holding it. Next to her stood her husband. Yes, husband. She remarried fast. Elliot. Smooth smile. Perfect hair. The kind of man who shakes your hand like he's evaluating whether you're useful. Vanessa's eyes landed on me and widened. For half a second, I saw something flicker behind her smile. Panic. Then she recovered and spread her arms like a greeting card. Oh my God, Caleb. You're here. That's my name. Caleb Hayes. She walked toward me fast, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a barrier than affection. You didn't tell me you were coming today, she whispered into my ear, still smiling for the guests. I told you last week, I whispered back. I said Wednesday, her nails pressed into my shoulder like a warning. She pulled away and raised her voice. Everyone, this is my brother Caleb. He's in town for a few days. A few polite hellos floated toward me. My eyes weren't on the guests. They were locked on my father, who'd returned from the kitchen with a new tray. He walked past Vanessa without meeting her eyes. Past Elliot. Past me. Like he didn't recognize me. Or like he wasn't allowed to. My heart started to pound in my throat, because if he didn't recognize his own son, then something had happened while I was gone. And if he did recognize me, but couldn't show it, that was worse. I set my suitcase down and stepped into his path gently. Dad? He stopped, slowly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. He looked up at me, and I saw his eyes try to focus, like his mind was reaching through fog. Then he blinked, and his mouth opened slightly. Are you here about the furnace? He asked quietly. It hit me like a punch. Not just the words, the fact that he said them like he'd been trained to. Like he'd rehearsed that line. My father didn't see his son. He saw a worker. And behind me, Vanessa's voice stayed bright, sugary, and wrong. Dad's been a little confused lately, she said loudly. You know how it is with aging. I turned slowly to look at her. My mouth was dry. My hands were cold. And in my chest something began to harden into a shape I recognized. A shape called certainty. Because I had just walked into my own house. And my father was a prisoner in it. So the only question was, what did Vanessa do to make him forget me? I need you to understand something about my sister before you judge how I could have missed this. Vanessa wasn't always a villain. Growing up, she was the loud one. The one who could charm a teacher out of giving her extra credit. The one who always had friends over, always had drama, always had a story. I was the quiet one. The kid who watched. The kid who made sure Dad took his blood pressure meds. The kid who learned early that stability doesn't announce itself. It just holds everything together. After Mom died, Dad did his best, but grief made him rough around the edges. Vanessa handled it by escaping, dating older guys, partying, and pushing boundaries. I handled it by staying close to home. When I got into a state school on scholarship and later landed a job in software, Dad looked at me like I'd pulled us out of a riptide. Vanessa looked at me like I'd left her behind. By the time I sold my startup, I was 39 and tired in a way money doesn't fix. I bought Dad that Bozeman house because he'd spent his whole life building other people's homes and never owning anything that felt like his. The first few years were good. He sent me pictures of deer in the backyard. He built a workbench in the garage and texted me photos of crooked birdhouses with captions like, "Don't laugh. It's functional." Vanessa visited once a year, sometimes less. She'd breeze in, take selfies with Dad, post them online, with captions about family being everything, then disappear, back to wherever she was living. Then her marriage exploded. She called me one night sobbing, saying her husband cheated, saying she had nowhere to go. Dad offered the guest room without hesitation. I wasn't thrilled, but I told myself, she's his daughter. He loves her. Maybe she'll grow up. Vanessa arrived in Bozeman with 2 suitcases and a wounded pride glow that made her dangerous. Within 3 months, she was helping Dad with bills. Within 6, she was handling his appointments. Within a year, she'd remarried Elliot, who said he worked in investments but never explained what kind. They threw a small wedding in the backyard of my house and didn't invite me because, according to Vanessa, I was always too busy. And I let it happen. That's the part that's hard to say. I let it happen because I was exhausted. Because I thought my dad was safe. Because I thought a house deed and a bank account meant control. I wired money to Dad monthly, not because he needed it, but because I wanted him to have options, travel, hobbies, medical care without stress. $10,000 a month, sometimes more. I didn't monitor it closely. Dad never asked questions. He grew up in a world where you didn't question a blessing. Vanessa, though, she questioned everything. Why Dad needed so much space. Why the house should stay in the family. Why I wasn't around but still made decisions. She'd say things like, "Caleb, you're not here. You don't see what Dad needs." Then she'd soften it with, "I'm glad you've been successful, but this is real life." And the worst part is, she was right about one thing. I wasn't there. I was in conference rooms. Airports. Investor dinners. I was in the future. My dad was in the present, getting older, slower, and more dependent. And Vanessa was there beside him, smiling like a solution. So when she texted me a year ago saying, "Dad's memory is slipping a bit. Nothing huge, but I'm taking over paperwork so he doesn't get overwhelmed," I didn't immediately panic. I asked if he'd seen a doctor. She said yes. I asked for the doctor's name. She sent me a name I didn't recognize and a photo of a report that looked like it had been printed off a template. It said, "Mild cognitive impairment, recommended family support, and suggested limited financial stress." Vanessa's message beneath it, "Don't worry. Elliot and I have it covered." I should have flown out that day. But I didn't, because I wanted to believe it. Because admitting something was wrong would mean admitting my absence had consequences. Then came the weird things. Dad stopped calling. His texts got shorter. Sometimes, when I called, Vanessa answered and said, "He's resting." When I insisted on speaking to him, she'd put him on speaker, and his voice sounded careful, like he was being watched. Then I got that last voicemail. And now, standing in my own backyard, watching my father carry trays like a hired hand while strangers treated him like furniture, I finally understood what I had refused to see. Vanessa didn't come back to help Dad. She came back because my house, my money, my father's vulnerability, was a locked door, and she'd found the key. And now I needed to know how deep it went. Because if Vanessa had convinced my father he was confused, if she'd gotten legal control, then this wasn't just family drama. This was a crime wearing a smile. That night, after the guests left and the fire pit died down, Vanessa cornered me in the kitchen like we were still kids, and she could intimidate me with a look. "We need to talk," she said. "Yeah," I replied, watching my dad in the hallway, moving slowly, quietly, eyes down. "We do." She sighed theatrically. "You can't just show up and disrupt everything. Dad doesn't handle surprises well. Dad doesn't handle being treated like a server in his own home either," I said. Her jaw tightened. "He likes having something to do. Purpose is good for him. Purpose isn't the same as humiliation." Elliot leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Caleb, you're emotional. You haven't been here. Vanessa's been managing everything. If you want to help, great, but don't accuse." I looked at them both, in my own kitchen, in my own house, and I realized I didn't even know what mine meant anymore. I forced my voice to be calm. "Where's Dad sleeping?" Vanessa hesitated, Downstairs. My stomach sank. Downstairs where? In the lower room, she said quickly. It's quieter. Fewer stairs. There are 4 bedrooms upstairs, I said. A guest suite on the main level. Why is he downstairs? Vanessa's eyes sharpened. Because he wanders at night. He gets confused. We don't want him falling. I stepped closer. Do you have keys to his room? Of course, she snapped. Then she softened again. Caleb, please, don't make this harder. Like the hard part wasn't my father asking if I was there to fix a furnace. I nodded, pretending acceptance. But inside, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them with anger. I wasn't going to give them a chance to hide evidence. I was going to do what I should have done a year ago. I was going to learn the truth. Quietly. Completely. And when I finally moved, it would be too late for them to run. I waited until the house was asleep. Not because I was scared. Because I needed to see what they didn't want me to see. I lay in the guest room, my old room, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house creaked with normal settling sounds, but underneath that was a different kind of silence, a heavy one. At 2:17 a.m., I slipped out. I walked barefoot down the hall, past Vanessa and Elliot's room, where I could hear low murmurs and the soft glow of a TV. They were still awake. That told me something. People who are innocent sleep without fear. I moved down the stairs toward the lower level. The air got colder. The lights were off, but moonlight spilled through a small window near the laundry room. And then I saw it, a door at the end of the hall. Plain. Unmarked. With a deadbolt on the outside. I stood there, staring. My throat tightened. A deadbolt on the outside means the person inside doesn't control when they leave. I put my hand on the knob and turned. Locked. I leaned closer and listened. Nothing at first. Then a soft sound. Breathing. I knocked gently. Dad? I whispered. Silence. I knocked again. Dad, it's me. A shuffle. Then a quiet voice. Thin and careful. Who is it? It's Caleb, I said. Your son. The lock clicked. Not the deadbolt. The handle lock from inside, so he could lock it from his side too. But that deadbolt outside? That was someone else. The door opened a crack. My father's face appeared in the dim light. He looked, scared. Not startled. Not sleepy. Scared. He blinked at me like he wasn't sure I was real. Caleb? He whispered. I nodded. Yeah, Dad, it's me. He opened the door wider and stepped back. The room was small, colder than it should have been. A cot. A dresser. A little space heater plugged into an extension cord. No bathroom. Just a bucket in the corner with a lid. I felt something in my vision narrow, like the world went tunnel-shaped. What is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad rubbed his hands together like he was warming them. It's the downstairs room. Vanessa said, it's safer. Safer from what? He glanced toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the invisible presence of my sister. From me, he said quietly. From wandering. From making mistakes. My mouth went dry. Dad, I said softly, stepping closer. Do you know who I am? He stared at me for a long moment, then his eyes filled with tears. Yes, he whispered. Of course I do. My chest cracked. Then why did you ask if I was here about the furnace earlier? He swallowed. Because she told me to. I exhaled slowly through my nose. Who told you to? He didn't answer. I didn't need him to. I crouched in front of him and spoke gently. Dad, has Vanessa been hurting you? His jaw trembled. He shook his head fast, like the answer itself could get him punished. No. No, she's helping. Dad, I said, voice firm but soft, look at me. He did. You can tell me the truth. He stared for a long moment, then whispered, she gets angry. Elliot gets angry. I don't want to be a problem. You're not a problem, I said, the words coming out like a vow. You're my dad. He flinched at a sound upstairs, maybe a floorboard, maybe the TV. Please, he murmured, don't fight. She said if you fight, she'll send him away, like he was luggage. I stood, slowly, forcing calm. Dad, I said, I'm not here to start a fight. I'm here to make sure you're safe. He shook his head again, more urgently. You can't. She has papers. What papers? His face pinched with shame. I signed things. She said it was for taxes, for insurance, so she could help. My blood turned to ice. I took out my phone and quietly turned on voice recording, not to trap my father, but to remember every word. Dad, I asked, did she ever tell you I stopped sending money? His eyes flickered. She said, you had problems, that your business, that you lost, that you were embarrassed. A wave of nausea rolled through me. No, I said, forcing the word gentle. I never stopped. I never missed a month. He looked confused, like his brain didn't want to accept it. Then he whispered, she said you didn't want me calling, that you were moving on. My hands clenched at my sides. This wasn't just financial. This was psychological warfare. Cutting him off. Rewriting reality. Making him doubt his own child. I looked around the room again. The cot, the bucket, the space heater, and I felt my anger sharpen into something precise. Vanessa didn't just take over his life. She shrank it, and she did it while telling herself she deserved it. I stepped back to the door and listened again. No footsteps, no voices. I leaned in close to Dad and whispered, tomorrow, don't act different. Don't let them know we talked. His eyes widened. Why? Because, I said, I need to understand exactly what they've done. And I need proof. His face tightened with fear. I took his hands in mine. They were cold. Rough, familiar. I promise you, I said, I'm going to fix this. He swallowed hard. Please, don't make it worse. I looked into my father's eyes and realized the cruelest part of all. They'd trained him to believe he deserved this. I slipped out, eased the door closed, and stared at the deadbolt for a long moment. Then I walked back upstairs, not like a son going to bed, but like a man preparing for a war he didn't ask for. And if you've ever had someone you love reduced to fear in their own home, you already know what I felt then. So stay with me, because what I discovered next wasn't just betrayal, it was a full-on theft of a life. The next morning, Vanessa acted like nothing happened. She served coffee in a mug that said live, laugh, love like it wasn't a threat. Elliot gave me a tight smile and asked about business, as if we were equals. My father stayed quiet, eyes down, hands folded. He didn't look at me for long. But when Vanessa turned her back, he glanced up once, just once, and I saw something in him. Hope. And that hope made my stomach twist. Because hope is fragile. You don't offer it unless you can deliver. So I started digging. I drove into Bozeman and sat in a public library because I didn't trust the Wi-Fi at my own house anymore. I opened my laptop, logged into everything, and began with the obvious, the house deed. It should have been in my name, or at least in a trust for Dad. The county website loaded slowly. I typed in the address, and there it was. Owner, Ridgeview Holdings, LLC. I stared at the screen. My heart thumped hard. Ridgeview Holdings, an LLC. I clicked deeper. Registered agent, Elliot's business address. Member, Vanessa Hayes, Elliot Hayes. I refreshed, like maybe it would change. It didn't. My house wasn't my house. It was their company's asset. I felt cold spread through my arms. How? I had bought it with cash. I had never put Vanessa on anything. Unless my father had signed something he didn't understand. I pulled up the transfer history. 6 years ago, property deed transferred from Caleb Hayes to Gordon Hayes. 3 years ago, transferred from Gordon Hayes to Ridgeview Holdings, LLC. So at some point, my father had become the legal owner. And then, under help, he'd signed it away. I breathed slowly and kept going. Bank accounts. I had set up a separate account for Dad years ago, and I had direct deposit into it. I logged in. Balance, $1,842. I blinked. That account should have had at least 50 grand sitting there from regular deposits. I pulled transaction history. My deposits were there, but so were transfers out. Every month, within hours of my deposit, the money moved to another account, an account I didn't recognize. I traced the routing number. It led to a joint account under Vanessa and Elliot. I did the math, slowly, carefully, because I didn't trust anger to calculate. $10,000 a month, 12 months a year. For at least 3 years, that's $360,000. Minimum. And that was just the obvious trail. I searched for legal filings under Dad's name. There it was again. A guardianship petition was filed 2.5 years ago, filed by Vanessa, claiming Dad had diminished capacity and needed support managing finances and medical decisions. Attached, a doctor's evaluation. Dr. Alan Crowther. I Googled the name. 2 malpractice suits. 1 license suspension. A pattern of evaluation mills where families pay for favorable diagnoses. My hands hovered over the keyboard. This was a playbook. Get a questionable doctor to sign off. File guardianship, gain legal control, move assets, isolate the vulnerable person, control communication, rewrite reality. Then I found the part that made me sit back in my chair, breath leaving my body. A life insurance claim. Not mine, my father's. A policy I'd bought him years ago just in case, with me listed as beneficiary. The claim was filed 18 months ago. Status, paid. Amount, $2 million. Beneficiary, Vanessa Hayes, as appointed conservator. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My father was alive. So how was there a payout? I pulled up the details and felt my skin crawl. It wasn't a death claim. It was an early access payout for terminal illness, using a rider that required medical certification. Certification signed by Dr. Crowther. Diagnosis: late-stage cancer. My fingers went numb. My father didn't have cancer, at least not that I knew. But suddenly the downstairs cot, the cold, the weakness. My brain tried to connect dots. I closed the laptop and forced myself to breathe. Because if Vanessa had forged a diagnosis, that meant she was willing to put it on paper, which meant she was willing to build a case. And if she was building a case, then she was preparing for an endgame, one where my father disappeared into a facility, or died naturally, right on schedule. I drove back to the house on autopilot, hands tight on the wheel. When I walked in, Vanessa was on the phone, laughing like nothing mattered. My father was in the kitchen, washing dishes. Washing dishes in my house, while the people who stole it wore comfort like perfume. I stepped closer to him and spoke softly, so only he could hear. "Dad," I said, "do you have cancer?" His hands froze. He didn't turn around. He whispered, "They said I did." My blood ran cold. "Do you feel sick?" I asked. He hesitated. "Sometimes. But I don't know what's real anymore. That was the point. To confuse him, to make him doubt himself. I looked at his thin frame, his slumped shoulders. I wanted to grab him and leave right then. But leaving without proof would let Vanessa control the narrative. She'd call the police. Claim I kidnapped him. Claim he was confused. And she had paperwork. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I stayed. And I played along. I smiled at dinner. I nodded at Elliot's boring stories. I watched Vanessa watch me, her eyes constantly calculating. And that night, back in my room, I made calls. Not to friends, not to family, to professionals. Because this wasn't something you fight with yelling. You fight it with evidence. The first call was to a private investigator in Helena, I'd used once for corporate due diligence. Rafe Dalton. I need surveillance, I told him. Legal. Clean. Documentation level. The second call was to an elder law attorney in Missoula, Janine Porter. I didn't dramatize. I just said, I believe my father is under coercive guardianship and financial exploitation. There was a pause. Then her voice turned sharp and focused. Where is he right now? In the house I bought for him, I said. And he's sleeping behind a door with a deadbolt on the outside. Her tone dropped. Do not confront them alone. We're going to move fast. And the third call was to my bank's fraud department. Because if Vanessa stole money, she left footprints. And footprints can become chains. I hung up and stared out my window at the dark slope of pines. My father was downstairs, behind that door. My sister was asleep in my home, wearing my father's trust like a stolen coat. And I realized something that made my stomach clench. Vanessa wasn't just stealing. She was erasing. Erasing my role as son. Erasing Dad's freedom. Erasing the truth. And when someone is willing to erase truth, you have to bring it back in a way they can't deny. 2 days later, Rafe Dalton met me in a grocery store parking lot like we were swapping secrets in a spy movie. He handed me a folder and a small flash drive. Public records, he said, and something else. I took the folder, heart pounding. What's the something else? I asked. Rafe looked at me for a long moment. Your name came up. My stomach tightened. How? He opened the folder and slid one page toward me. A court document. A petition. Filed a year ago. To declare Caleb Hayes legally incapacitated. I blinked. That's me. Rafe nodded. Filed in King County, Washington. Dismissed on a technicality, but what? My voice sounded distant, like it wasn't coming from me. He slid another page. A restraining order request. Claiming I was a danger to my father. Claiming I had violent tendencies. Claiming I had substance issues. My hands trembled. None of it was true, but it didn't matter, because if it was on paper, it was a weapon. I looked up. Who filed this? Rafe didn't answer. He didn't have to. The name was at the bottom. Vanessa Hayes. Co-signed by Elliot Hayes. I sat in my car and stared at that signature like it was a snake. She wasn't just taking from Dad. She was preparing to take me out of the picture. And suddenly, everything made sense. Why Dad believed I moved on. Why Vanessa controlled the calls. Why she needed paperwork. She wasn't just stealing money. She was building a world where I was the villain. So if I showed up angry, and I would have, she could point to the documents and say, see, he's unstable. If I tried to take Dad away, she could call it kidnapping. If I tried to confront her, she could call it harassment. I had stepped into a trap designed months ago. And now I knew the endgame. Vanessa planned to keep Dad isolated until he was declared incompetent permanently, then move him into a facility, then drain what was left, then sell the house under the LLC, then tell the world she was a devoted daughter who did her best, and if I tried to stop it, she'd bury me in paperwork. I drove home with my hands shaking. When I walked into the house, Vanessa was in the living room with her laptop, smiling like she hadn't just tried to legally destroy me. Hey, she said brightly. Everything okay? You've been out a lot. Just errands, I said. Elliot walked in, adjusting his watch. We should talk tomorrow, he said, about your involvement here. There it was. The first move. They felt me shifting. They were ready to tighten the leash. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and watched the hallway camera feed Rafe had legally set up outside the downstairs hall, placed with permission because I was still technically a resident there and because we kept it compliant. At 11:43 p.m., Vanessa walked downstairs with keys in her hand. At 11:44, she stopped at my father's door. At 11:45, the deadbolt clicked from the outside. Locked. My father was locked in like a dog in a kennel, and then she did something that made my hands go numb. She stood there, leaning in, and whispered through the door. I couldn't hear all of it, but the mic picked up enough. If you talk to him, she hissed, I swear I will put you somewhere no one visits. Do you understand me? A pause. A faint voice. My father's. Yes. Vanessa's tone softened into fake sweetness. Good. Then we're all going to be just fine. She walked back upstairs like she hadn't just threatened her own father. I sat there, staring at the screen, and felt a cold clarity settle in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't care or stress. This was calculated abuse. And now I had it recorded. If you've ever watched someone you love get bullied in silence, you'll understand why I didn't storm upstairs screaming. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a finish. So stay with me, because the next step wasn't anger, it was strategy. Janine Porter didn't react with shock when I showed her the evidence. She reacted with procedure. That's what you want in a lawyer. Shock wastes time. Procedure wins cases. We met in her office in Missoula, a space that smelt like coffee and paper and quiet competence. I laid out everything. The deed transfers, the bank transactions, the guardianship filings, the insurance payout, and the recorded threat. Janine flipped through it all with a pen in her hand, marking notes, eyes sharp. This is bad, she said finally. I exhaled. I know. No. She corrected. This is criminal. Financial exploitation. Coercion. Potential fraud with the insurance rider. And the lock? That's unlawful restraint territory. I rubbed my face. What do? We move fast and clean, she said. We need to petition to suspend the guardianship and conservatorship. Emergency motion. We need a medical evaluation from a reputable physician. And we need adult protective services involved. I nodded. Okay. And, she added, we need to protect you. I blinked. She tapped the papers about the restraining order attempts. They tried to paint you as unstable. That means they'll do it again. No yelling. No threats. No physical contact. I don't care how tempted you are. I swallowed hard. I won't. Janine studied me like she was measuring whether I could hold that promise. Then she nodded once. Good, because the law can be your weapon here, but only if you don't give them a reason to turn it on you. So we built the plan. Step 1. Get my father evaluated independently. But that was tricky, because Vanessa controlled his appointments. So Janine arranged for a mobile geriatric physician to come to the house as a wellness check, legally requested because of the guardianship dispute and potential abuse report. Step 2. Notify apps. We did it with the evidence attached. Step 3. Petition the court for emergency suspension. We filed it the same day. Step 4. Secure financial records. Because Vanessa's theft wasn't just immoral, it was traceable. My bank cooperated faster than I expected once they heard elder exploitation. And step 5. The hardest. Get my father to safety without giving Vanessa a chance to claim I abducted him. Janine's solution was painfully simple. We do it openly. With authorities present. With medical staff. With paperwork. No drama. No ambush. Just reality. Walking through the front door with a badge. But there was one missing piece. Motive. Judges care about evidence, but juries care about motive. So Rafe dug deeper into Vanessa and Elliot. He found credit card debt, luxury purchases, and a pattern of failed investment projects. And then he found the anchor. Elliot had been sued twice for misleading clients. He'd settled quietly both times. Vanessa's new life was expensive. They needed cash. They needed assets. And my father's trust, was the easiest vault to crack. That's when Janine asked me a question I wasn't ready for. Caleb, she said, what do you want the outcome to be? I didn't answer immediately. Because part of me wanted to scorch the earth. Part of me wanted Vanessa to feel fear the way Dad felt fear behind that door. But I looked at my father's name on those documents, and I heard his voice. Please don't make it worse. So I said the only honest thing. I want my dad back, I said, and I want her to never be able to do this to anyone again. Janine nodded. Then we proceed. I drove home that night with a folder of legal documents on the passenger seat like it was a weapon. Vanessa and Elliot were inside, probably drinking wine, probably laughing, probably assuming they'd already won because they'd made my father small. But they didn't understand something. I might have been absent. I might have been naive. But I was not powerless, and when I walked into that house again, smiling politely, carrying groceries like everything was normal, I wasn't a guest, I was a countdown. The morning it happened, the snow fell lightly, soft flakes that made everything look peaceful. That's the lie of winter. It looks calm while it freezes you. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming, wearing leggings and a sweater that screamed wealthy comfort. Elliot sat at the table, scrolling his phone like the world was his. My father was downstairs. I watched the hallway clock tick toward 10:00 a.m. That's when Janine said the team would arrive. At 9:58, Vanessa looked at me and smiled. You've been quiet, she said. You okay? Just tired, I replied. She tilted her head. You know, Caleb, it might be best if you head back to wherever you've been living. Dad gets confused with too many people around. I nodded slowly. Maybe. Elliot set his phone down. We can talk about it after lunch, he said. About boundaries. Boundaries. In my house. I nearly laughed. Instead, I kept my face neutral. At 10:03, the doorbell rang. Vanessa frowned. Are we expecting someone? I shrugged. Not me. Elliot stood, irritation flashing. I'll get it. He opened the door. And his posture changed. Because standing on the porch were two uniformed sheriff's deputies, a woman from Adult Protective Services with a clipboard, and a doctor in a heavy coat carrying a bag. Janine stood behind them, calm as stone. Good morning, she said. Vanessa Hayes? Elliot Hayes? Vanessa appeared in the hallway, face tightening. What is this? She snapped. Janine held up a folder. Emergency petition filed. Court-approved welfare check. Independent medical evaluation. And an APS investigation based on evidence of coercion and unlawful restraint. Vanessa's smile vanished like it had never existed. This is ridiculous, she said. My father is fine. He's confused, but fine. The deputy's voice was firm. Ma'am, we need access to Mr. Gordon Hayes. Vanessa looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. You did this, she hissed. I didn't answer. Because if I did, she'd turn it into a scene. Janine spoke instead. We're going to see him now. Vanessa's hands clenched. He's resting. The APS worker stepped forward. We have to lay eyes on him, ma'am. Vanessa tried to block them with her body. The deputy shifted slightly. Not aggressively, just immovably. Ma'am, he repeated, move aside. Vanessa's face flushed red. Then she spun toward the stairs. Fine. But you're wasting everyone's time. She marched downstairs. I followed behind the group, my heart hammering. We reached the hallway. We reached the door. The deadbolt. The deputy pointed. Is that locked from the outside? Vanessa hesitated half a second too long. Janine didn't let her breathe. We have footage, she said calmly, of her locking it. And threatening him through the door, Vanessa's face went white. Elliot stepped forward, voice sharp. This is harassment. Janine turned her gaze on him. Be quiet. The deputy nodded at Vanessa. Open it. Vanessa's hand shook as she used the key. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened. And my father stood there in the dim light, blinking like a man stepping out of a cave. He looked at the uniforms, the clipboard, and the doctor. Then his eyes landed on me. For a second, he looked afraid. Then I saw it, like the sun breaking through cloud. Relief. Gordon Hayes? The doctor asked gently. My father nodded. We're here to check on you, the apps worker said. Are you safe? My father's mouth opened and closed. He glanced at Vanessa. Vanessa's eyes burnt into him like a command. And then my father did the bravest thing I've ever seen him do. He looked away from her. He looked at the deputy. And he whispered, "No." Vanessa lunged forward. "Dad, don't." The deputy stepped between them immediately. "Ma'am," he warned. Vanessa froze, shaking with rage. The doctor moved into the room, assessing and asking questions. "Do you know where you are?" "Yes." "Do you know today's date?" My father hesitated, then answered correctly. Vanessa's jaw dropped, because that was the first crack in her story. Dad wasn't confused. He was controlled. The doctor asked about cancer. Dad blinked. "They said I had it. Has any doctor ever told you directly?" "No." The doctor's face hardened. Vanessa started talking fast. "He forgets things. He lies. He's embarrassed." Janine held up a hand. "Stop." Then Janine nodded at me. I pulled out my phone and handed it to the deputy. "Sir," I said, voice steady, "please play that recording." The deputy did. Vanessa's voice filled the hallway, cold, threatening, unmistakable. "If you talk to him, I'll put you somewhere no one visits." The deputy's expression changed, not shocked, angry. Vanessa's mouth opened in protest, but no sound came out. Elliot tried to speak. "This is out of context." The deputy raised a hand. "Sir, step back." Janine spoke quietly to the apps worker, who nodded. Then the deputy looked at Vanessa. "Ma'am," he said, "based on this evidence and the welfare check, you're being detained pending investigation for unlawful restraint and elder abuse." Vanessa's face contorted. "You can't. This is my father." The deputy's tone didn't change. "Hands behind your back." Elliot lunged forward. "This is insane." The second deputy stepped in and blocked him. And just like that, the house that had been Vanessa's playground became a crime scene. My father stood in the doorway of that tiny room, shaking. I stepped closer and gently touched his shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're not alone anymore." His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think," he murmured. "I didn't think anyone would believe me." "I believe you," I said. Janine turned to me and spoke softly, but loud enough for the room to hear. "Caleb," she said, "this is where it begins. And if you're listening right now and thinking, that's justice, just wait. Because the real consequences weren't the handcuffs. Stay with me. Because what came out after the arrest was the kind of truth that destroys reputations forever." They took Vanessa and Elliot out through the front door. Vanessa screamed the whole way, not in fear, in fury, like a person who can't comprehend losing control. "This is my house," she shrieked. "He's manipulating you. He's always been." Her voice cut off when the deputy guided her into the vehicle. Elliot didn't scream. He smiled. That's what scared me more. He looked at me as they led him out and said quietly, "You think you've won? You have no idea what you just started." Then the door shut, and silence fell over the house like a blanket. My father sank into a chair in the living room, hands trembling, eyes darting, as if waiting for someone to burst in and punish him for speaking. The doctor recommended immediate evaluation at the hospital. Malnutrition, possible neglect, untreated conditions. Dad tried to protest. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the old habit. But his voice cracked. I knelt in front of him. "Dad, please, let them check you. For me." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At the hospital in Bozeman, the truth became measurable. He wasn't dying of cancer. But he was dehydrated. Underweight. His blood pressure was uncontrolled. He had untreated arthritis pain that made him move stiffly. He had bruising on his upper arm consistent with forceful gripping. And when the nurse asked if he felt safe at home, he whispered, "Not with them." An APS caseworker took notes. Janine coordinated with the court. And within 48 hours, an emergency order suspended Vanessa's guardianship and froze Ridgeview Holdings' ability to sell or refinance the property. But the bigger avalanche started when we subpoenaed records. Because Vanessa's theft wasn't just my money. She'd opened credit cards in Dad's name. She'd taken loans against the house under the LLC. She'd used Dad's SIS-N to apply for benefits he never received. And the cancer paperwork? The insurance company got involved fast. Fraud makes them move like sharks. They launched their own investigation. Dr. Crowther, the evaluation doctor, suddenly had his license under review again. And then, like a final cruel joke, we found the worst part. Vanessa had drafted a new will for Dad. A will that left everything to her, signed 6 months ago, witnessed by 2 friends who attended those parties. My father stared at the document when Janine showed him. His hands shook. I didn't know, he whispered. She said it was, for taxes. Dad, I said gently, did you want that? He looked at me with shame so heavy it made my chest ache. No, he said. I didn't even understand. Janine nodded slowly. Coercion, she murmured. We'll challenge it. But challenging paperwork doesn't heal the human part. My father had been living in fear for years. He'd been told he was confused, that he was a burden, that his own son had abandoned him. And now that the lie was cracking, he had to rebuild his sense of reality. One night in the hospital, after visiting ours, he asked me quietly, why did she hate me so much? I swallowed hard. Because the answer was ugly and simple. She didn't hate you, I said. She used you. He stared at the ceiling. Was I stupid? He asked. No, I said firmly. You were trusting. That's not stupidity. That's being the kind of man who believes family means something. He turned his head toward me, eyes wet. I thought I failed you, he whispered. I thought you didn't want me anymore. My throat tightened. I took his hand. Dad, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. He squeezed my fingers weakly. You're here now. The case moved fast after that. The district attorney filed charges: elder abuse, unlawful restraint, financial exploitation, and fraud. Vanessa's friends distanced themselves immediately. Those parties? They vanished. Elliot's investment clients started coming forward too. People who'd been burnt before, but never had proof. Now they did. Because when someone is caught in one crime, the mask slips in all of them. A month later, I walked into a courtroom and watched my sister sit at the defense table, eyes cold, hair perfect, pretending she was the victim. She looked at me and mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I could read lips. Traitor. I didn't flinch. Because I finally understood. She thought family loyalty meant protecting her actions. I thought family loyalty meant protecting my father. And only one of those is real. The day the judge made it official, it didn't feel dramatic. No music swelled. No confetti fell. It was just a gavel and a sentence. Guardianship revoked permanently. Restraining attempts dismissed. Property transfers under Ridgeview Holdings placed under forensic review with a strong likelihood of reversal due to coercion and fraud. Assets frozen. Restitution ordered, and Vanessa and Elliot, facing multiple charges, were remanded to await trial. As we left the courthouse, my father walked slowly beside me, bundled in a warm coat I bought him. He looked smaller than I remembered, but something in his posture had changed. He wasn't folded inward anymore. He was standing. Outside, the air smelt like snow. Dad looked up at the sky and exhaled. I can breathe, he said quietly, like he was surprised. I nodded. Yeah. I said. Me too. We didn't go back to the Bozeman house right away, not because we couldn't. Because Dad didn't want to. That house held too many nights behind that deadbolt. So I rented a small place near the river. Simple, warm, 2 bedrooms. I set up a workshop corner for him with real tools, not the cheap ones Vanessa gave him like a child. At first, he moved around like he expected permission. He'd ask, "Is it okay if I make coffee? Is it okay if I go outside? Is it okay if I watch TV?" Each time, my chest would tighten. And each time, I'd say, "Dad, you don't need permission." It took weeks for that to sink in. Therapy helped. For him. For me. For me, because rage doesn't vanish just because justice happens. Rage lingers. It whispers. It tries to turn you into the same kind of cruel. But I didn't want revenge that made me ugly. I wanted revenge that made us free. The trial didn't happen right away. Legal systems move at the speed of paperwork. But the consequences started immediately. Friends stopped calling Vanessa. Brands stopped sponsoring her lifestyle posts. Elliot's accounts were flagged. In the community, quiet Montana people who don't like drama began talking. Not with gossip, with disgust. Because everyone knew my father. The old man who used to fix fences for neighbors. The man who shoveled a widow's driveway without being asked. People don't forget that kind of goodness. And they don't forgive people who exploit it. One afternoon, 6 months later, Dad and I stood on a different porch. Not in Bozeman. We moved to a smaller town east of Missoula. Closer to mountains. Quieter. Less status. More air. The new house wasn't a mansion. It was a sturdy, warm cabin-style home with a workshop and a wide porch. Dad picked it. He wanted something that felt like his, not like a monument to my money. I watched him set up bird feeders in the yard, hands steadier than they'd been when I first came home. He turned to me and smiled. A real smile. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "You want to help me hang this?" I blinked. Not because it was hard. Because it was normal. And normal, after what we'd lived through, felt like a miracle. Later, as the sun lowered behind the pines, Dad sat beside me with coffee and said softly, "Do you think she ever loved me?" I thought about Vanessa, how she screamed in the driveway, how she locked that deadbolt, and how she tried to erase me on paper. I didn't want to poison Dad with hatred. So I answered honestly but gently. "I think," I said, "she loved what you represented." Security. A safety net, and when she got scared, she chose control instead of care. Dad nodded slowly. "She used to be a little girl," he murmured. "She used to run to me when she scraped her knee. I know," I said. He stared at his coffee. I keep thinking I could have done something different. I put my hand on his arm. "Dad." "She made choices. You didn't cause them." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Then he looked at me and said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For coming back," he said. "For believing me. For not letting me disappear." My throat tightened. I stared out at the mountains, at the sky turning pink, and I thought about how close I'd come to losing him. Not to death, but to silence. "That won't happen again," I said, and I meant it. Because the real revenge wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the frozen accounts. It wasn't Vanessa's downfall. It was watching my father live without fear. It was hearing him laugh again. It was seeing him stand on a porch he chose, breathing air that belonged to him. So if you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed by family, I want you to answer something in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them right away? Or would you have built the case and let the system crush them? If this story hit you, if it reminded you that justice can be quiet, but still powerful, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. And tell me where you're watching from, city and country, because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders to protect the people who love you, to trust your instincts, and to never let toxic people rewrite your reality.